Have you ever been so humiliated in front of the people you love that you felt your entire world crumbling beneath your feet? Have you ever given everything you had to someone only to have them tear you apart in front of everyone who matters? Well, let me tell you what happened to me because this story changed my life forever, and I need to share it with you. My name doesn't matter anymore, but what matters is what I went through, what I survived, and how I finally found the courage to stand up for myself when everyone expected me to just take it, to smile through the pain, to be the good girl who never complains. This is my truth, my story, told exactly as I lived it, felt it, and survived it. I remember that night like it was yesterday, even though months have passed since then. The way my hands trembled as I walked into that restaurant, the knot in my stomach that told me something was wrong, the false smile I plastered on my face because I had become so good at pretending everything was fine. I had spent years perfecting that smile, years learning how to hide my pain behind a mask of competence and grace. But that night, that terrible, life-changing night, everything I had been holding inside was about to explode in ways I never could have imagined. I was walking into what I thought would be a simple family dinner, a celebration of another successful quarter for the business that I had poured my heart and soul into for the past 7 years. 7 years of my life, 7 years of sacrifice, 7 years of putting everyone else's needs before my own. My husband's family owned a chain of boutique hotels, and I had been managing the flagship branch since shortly after we got married. It wasn't just a job to me. It was my passion, my purpose, my way of proving that I belonged in this family that had always made me feel like an outsider. I came from humble beginnings, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to put food on our table, who taught me the value of hard work and dignity, even when the world tried to take both away from us. When I met Marcus at that business conference 8 years ago, I thought I had found my fairy tale ending. He was charming, successful, from a family that seemed to have everything I had always dreamed of: stability, respect, legacy. But what I didn't realize then, what took me years to understand, was that marrying into money doesn't mean you're accepted. It just means you're tolerated as long as you're useful. From the very beginning, Marcus's mother, Victoria, made it clear that I wasn't good enough for her son. She never said it directly, of course. Women like her never do. Instead, it was the way she would correct my grammar at family gatherings, the way she would mention Marcus's ex-girlfriend who came from the right kind of family, the way she would smile sweetly while delivering the most cutting remarks disguised as concern. But I was determined to prove her wrong, to show her that I deserved to be part of this family, that I could contribute something meaningful to their legacy. So when they offered me the position of managing their newest branch, the one in the historic downtown district that was supposed to be their crown jewel, I jumped at the opportunity without hesitation. I saw it as my chance to finally earn their respect, to show them what I was capable of, to make Marcus proud. What I didn't see was that I was walking into a trap, a role designed to keep me busy, to keep me grateful, to keep me from asking too many questions about my place in the family, or demanding more than they were willing to give. Those first few years were exhausting, but exhilarating. I worked 16-hour days, sometimes sleeping in my office because I was too tired to drive home. I revolutionized their customer service protocols, implemented new booking systems that increased efficiency by 40%, personally trained every single staff member to deliver the kind of experience that would make our guests feel like royalty. I poured everything I had into that place, every ounce of creativity, every bit of business acumen I had developed through years of studying and working my way up from nothing. And it paid off. The branch I managed became the most profitable in their entire chain within 2 years. And I was so proud, so incredibly proud of what I had built. But here's what I didn't understand then, what I was too naive and too eager to please to see. My success threatened them. Every milestone I achieved, every positive review we received, every award we won, it highlighted their own mediocrity, their own lack of vision and drive. Marcus's brother David was supposed to be the golden child, the heir apparent who would take over the family business. But he was lazy and entitled, riding on his family name without ever putting in real work. And my success made that painfully obvious to everyone. The tension started building slowly. Comments here and there about how I was too ambitious, how I was forgetting my place, how I should let the men handle the business decisions, while I focused on the softer aspects of hospitality. I brushed it off at first, told myself they were just old-fashioned, that they would come around once they saw how much I was contributing to the family's wealth. But I was wrong, so incredibly wrong, and I was about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. That night at the restaurant, I arrived early because I'm always early. a habit from my childhood when being late could mean losing a job or missing a meal. The reservation was at 7, but I got there at 6:45, wanting to compose myself, to prepare mentally for another evening of subtle jabs and backhanded compliments that I would have to smile through. The restaurant they chose was one of those expensive places where the menu doesn't list prices, and the waiters speak in hushed, reverent tones. The kind of place that used to intimidate me, but that I had learned to navigate with the grace expected of a woman in my position. I sat at the table they had reserved, a private room in the back that Victoria insisted on for family privacy, and I waited. Marcus arrived next, barely acknowledging me before immediately checking his phone, his attention always somewhere else, always on something or someone more important than me. Then came his parents, Gerald and Victoria, dressed in their usual understated elegance that screamed old money and good breeding. David and his wife Jennifer followed, Jennifer shooting me that fake smile she always wore, the one that never reached her eyes. And finally, Marcus's younger sister Amanda, the only one in the family who had ever shown me genuine kindness, though even she had become distant over the past year. The dinner started normally enough. Small talk about business, about the upcoming holidays, about nothing that really mattered. I sat there, contributing when appropriate, laughing at the right moments, playing my role perfectly as I always did. But I could feel something in the air, a tension that made my skin prickle with unease, a sense that this wasn't just another family dinner. And then, just as dessert was being served, Gerald cleared his throat in that way he did when he was about to make an announcement, and I felt my heart sink into my stomach, because I just knew, that whatever was coming wasn't good. He started talking about the business, about quarterly reports and profit margins, and I relaxed slightly, thinking this was just another boring business discussion that would end with everyone congratulating themselves on being so successful. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. He announced that they had made a decision, a family decision, to restructure the management of all their branches, and that David would be taking over my position immediately. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and I felt like I couldn't breathe, like someone had punched me in the chest and knocked all the air from my lungs. I remember sitting there in complete shock, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth, my mind struggling to process what I had just heard. David was taking over my branch, the branch that I had built from the ground up, that I had sacrificed everything for, that had become more profitable than any of their other properties. It didn't make any sense, and I could feel panic rising in my throat like bile. I looked at Marcus, desperately searching his face for some sign that he would defend me, that he would stand up for his wife, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He just sat there, staring at his plate like a coward, and in that moment, I realized he had known about this all along. They all had. This dinner wasn't a celebration. It was an ambush, a carefully orchestrated humiliation designed to put me in my place once and for all. I found my voice, though it came out shakier than I would have liked, and I asked the question that was screaming inside my head: why? Why was I being removed from a position where I had excelled, where I had tripled their profits, where I had earned the respect of our staff and the loyalty of our clients? Gerald smiled at me, that condescending smile that rich men give to women they don't consider their equals, and he said that it was nothing personal, just business, that David needed more responsibility, and my branch was the logical place for him to start. Nothing personal? Nothing personal? I had given 7 years of my life to that place, had missed family events and friends' weddings and moments I could never get back, had pushed my body to its limits with stress and exhaustion, and it was nothing personal? But I held my tongue, swallowed my anger because that's what I had always done, kept quiet, been agreeable, not made waves. That's when Victoria decided to twist the knife even deeper. She leaned forward with that perfectly manicured hand of hers and said, in that sweet, poisonous voice of hers, that perhaps this was actually a blessing in disguise, that maybe now I could focus on what really mattered, like finally giving them grandchildren, like being a proper wife instead of playing businesswoman. Playing businesswoman. Those words cut through me like a razor blade, sharp and precise and designed to cause maximum damage. 7 years of 60-hour weeks, of innovative strategies, of building something meaningful, and she reduced it all to playing. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall, refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. But she wasn't done. Oh no. Victoria had clearly been saving this up for a long time, and she was going to make sure everyone heard what she really thought of me. She continued, her voice dripping with false concern, saying that she had always worried that I was too focused on work, that I was neglecting my duties as a wife, that perhaps if I had been more attentive to Marcus, more focused on building a family instead of building a business, things would be different. The implication was clear. She was blaming me for the growing distance in my marriage, for the fact that Marcus and I barely spoke anymore beyond logistics and schedules, for the coldness that had crept into our relationship over the years. And the worst part? Marcus still said nothing, just sat there letting his mother eviscerate me in front of his entire family. I looked around the table, desperately hoping someone would speak up, would defend me, would acknowledge that what was happening was wrong. Amanda looked uncomfortable but stayed silent. Jennifer actually looked pleased, like she was enjoying the show. David had a smirk on his face that made me want to throw my wine in his smug, entitled face. And Gerald just nodded along with his wife's every word, the united front of old money and traditional values that had no place for a woman like me, a woman who dared to be ambitious, who dared to be successful, who dared to think she deserved a seat at their table. But Victoria wasn't finished destroying me yet. She then said, "And I will never forget these words as long as I live, that maybe I should be grateful they were even keeping me in the family at all, considering my background, considering where I came from, considering that I had brought nothing to this marriage except my ambition and my pride." She said this all with a smile on her face, in that calm, measured tone that made it sound like she was giving me helpful advice instead of publicly humiliating me in front of everyone I had tried so hard to impress. And that's when something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, definitively, like a rope that has been pulled too tight finally breaking. I felt something shift in my chest, a coldness spreading through my veins, a clarity I had never experienced before. In that moment, sitting in that overpriced restaurant surrounded by people who had never truly accepted me, who had used me and exploited my talents while never giving me the respect I deserved, I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry, I wasn't going to beg, I wasn't going to argue or defend myself or try to make them understand my worth, because people who treat you like that will never see your value, no matter how much you prove yourself. Instead, I did something that shocked everyone at that table, including myself. I set down my fork very carefully, wiped my mouth with my napkin, and I smiled. Not a fake smile, not the smile I had been wearing for 7 years, but a real smile, the smile of someone who has just been set free. I looked directly at Victoria, then at Gerald, then at David with his stupid smirk, and I said very calmly and very clearly, "Thank you. Thank you for making this decision so easy for me. Thank you for showing me exactly who you all are, and thank you for giving me the perfect opportunity to do what I should have done years ago." They all looked confused, like they couldn't understand why I wasn't crying or begging or making a scene. Marcus finally looked up from his plate, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face, like he was just now realizing that maybe they had pushed too far. But it was too late, years too late, and I was done playing their games. I continued speaking, my voice steady and strong, stronger than I had ever heard it before, and I told them that I would be more than happy to hand over my position to David. In fact, I would do it immediately. Tonight even, because I wouldn't want to be accused of sabotaging the family business by staying on and making things difficult. But there was one small detail they should probably know about before David takes over. You see, that branch they thought was so successful, that branch that had become their crown jewel, it wasn't actually theirs anymore. Technically speaking, I owned it. The confusion on their faces was almost comical, and I felt a surge of satisfaction that probably wasn't very mature, but that I had absolutely earned. Gerald started to sputter, asking what I meant. How could I own it? It was family property. And that's when I explained what I had been doing for the past 3 years. The insurance policy I had been quietly building without any of them noticing because they were too busy looking down on me to pay attention to the fine print. When they had first given me the position, the branch was struggling, on the verge of bankruptcy actually, hemorrhaging money every month. They had seen it as a test, a way to see if I would fail so they could use it as proof that I wasn't capable of handling real responsibility. But I had turned it around. Not just turned it around, but made it their most profitable property. And I had done it through a very specific legal structure that they had all signed off on without reading carefully, because they assumed I was too stupid or too grateful to ever do anything that wasn't in their best interest. The structure I had set up meant that the branch operated as a separate legal entity, with profits being shared with the parent company, but with ownership remaining ambiguous enough that with the right lawyer and the right paperwork, which I had been quietly filing over the past year, I could make a very convincing case that the branch was mine. I had invested my own money, my own time, my own expertise, and I had documentation of every single instance where they had treated it as my personal project rather than company property. Every email where they had told me it was my responsibility to fix, my problem to solve, my risk to take. Have you ever seen the exact moment when powerful people realize they've been outmaneuvered? It's quite something. The color drained from Gerald's face. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, and David's smirk disappeared so fast it was like it had never been there. Marcus looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me. And maybe he was, because for 7 years he had been looking at a version of me that I had carefully constructed to please his family. And now he was seeing the real me, the me that came from nothing and knew how to fight, because I had been fighting my whole life. I stood up from the table, smoothing down my dress with hands that weren't shaking anymore, and I told them that I would be closing the branch effective immediately. Not selling it to them, not transferring it, closing it. Shutting the doors, terminating the leases, dismissing the staff with generous severance packages that I would personally fund, and walking away from everything I had built. Because I would rather burn it all down than let David run it into the ground, or let them profit one more day from my work while treating me like I was nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda actually gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Jennifer looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Victoria finally found her voice, screeching about lawsuits and legal action and how I couldn't possibly do this, how this was theft, how they would destroy me. But I just smiled again and told her that my lawyer, who happened to be one of the best in the state, and who had been reviewing my case pro bono because he was disgusted by how I had been treated, would be very happy to hear from their legal team. In fact, he was expecting their call. I had been planning this for a year, ever since the last time they had humiliated me at a family event, and I had every single document, every single email, every single piece of evidence I needed to make my case. Gerald tried a different approach, suddenly trying to be reasonable, saying we could talk about this, work something out, that there was no need for such drastic action. But I was done talking, done negotiating, done accepting crumbs from their table while pretending I was grateful for the opportunity to serve them. I looked at Marcus one last time, giving him a chance to say something, anything, to show me that our marriage meant more to him than his family's approval. But he just sat there, torn between me and them, and his silence told me everything I needed to know about where I ranked in his priorities. So I told him, right there in front of his entire family, that I would be filing for divorce as well, that my lawyer already had the papers ready, and that I would be moving out of our house within the week. The life I had been living, the person I had been pretending to be, it was over, and I was finally free. The walk out of that restaurant was the longest and shortest of my life, every step feeling both like an eternity and like I was floating, untethered from everything I had known. I could hear Victoria's voice rising behind me, shrill and panicked, Gerald trying to call me back, Marcus finally finding his voice but too little too late, his words hitting my back as I pushed through the door into the cool evening air. The valet brought my car around, the same luxury sedan that Marcus had insisted I drive because it looked appropriate for someone in my position, and I remember thinking that I would sell it tomorrow and buy something I actually liked, something that was mine and not an extension of their image. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of them in my rearview mirror, all spilling out of the restaurant in disarray, their perfect family dinner having turned into a catastrophe, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, lightness, like a weight I had been carrying for so long had finally been lifted from my shoulders. But let me back up, because I need you to understand how I got to that point. How a girl who had always played by the rules, who had always tried to be good and kind and accommodating, reached a place where burning everything down felt like the only option. The truth is, that night in the restaurant was just the culmination of years of small humiliations, tiny cuts that had bled me dry without me even realizing it until I was hollow inside. I need to tell you about the years that led up to that moment, about all the times I swallowed my pride, all the times I told myself that things would get better, that I just needed to work harder, be better, prove myself more. Because that's what women like me do, women who come from nothing and marry into something. We try so hard to be worthy that we lose ourselves in the process. I remember the first time I met Marcus's family, how nervous I was, how desperately I wanted them to like me. I had bought a new dress, nothing too expensive because I couldn't afford it, but something nice enough that I thought would make a good impression. I had practiced conversation topics, studied up on their business, done everything I could to prepare for what I thought would be the most important meeting of my life. My mother had hugged me before I left that day, her eyes filled with hope and worry in equal measure, and she had told me to be myself, that if Marcus truly loved me, his family would see what he saw. But what she didn't understand, what I didn't understand then, was that to families like the Ashfords, love wasn't enough. and being myself was exactly what they didn't want. That first dinner at their estate, and yes, they called it an estate, not a house, was like walking into a different world. Everything was so polished, so perfect, so carefully curated to display wealth without being gauche about it. Victoria had greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, looking me up and down in a way that made me feel like I was being appraised and found wanting. She commented on my dress, said it was charming in a tone that made it clear she meant cheap, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment. The dinner itself was a masterclass in making someone feel inferior without ever saying anything explicitly cruel. Questions about my family were designed to highlight the differences between us. Oh, your mother is a housekeeper. How industrious. What does your father do? Oh, I see you don't have one. How unfortunate. Comments about my education were backhanded compliments. State school. Well, that's certainly practical. You must be very bright to have succeeded despite the disadvantages. And through it all, Marcus said nothing, just smiled awkwardly and changed the subject whenever things got too uncomfortable, not defending me, but not confronting his family either, the position he would maintain for the entirety of our marriage. But I was in love, hopelessly, naively in love, and I convinced myself that I could win them over, that once they got to know me, once they saw how much I loved their son, how hard I was willing to work, how much I wanted to be part of their world, they would accept me. So I tried. God, how I tried. I took etiquette classes to learn which fork to use and how to make polite conversation about nothing. I studied art and opera and classical music so I could contribute to their dinner party discussions. I volunteered for every charity event Victoria organized, spending my weekends serving on committees and planning fundraisers, desperate for any sign of approval. And sometimes, rarely, I would get a crumb of praise. A moment where Victoria would say something almost nice, and I would cling to it like a lifeline, like proof that my efforts were working, that I was making progress. Looking back now, I can see how pathetic it was, how I was begging for scraps of approval from people who would never truly respect me, but at the time, I thought I was being strong, thought I was fighting for my place in the family I had married into. The wedding was beautiful, I'll give them that. Victoria made sure of it because it reflected on the family, on their image. But it wasn't my wedding. Not really. Every decision was made by Victoria, from the guest list, to the flowers, to the music, to the menu. When I suggested inviting some of my mother's friends, people who had supported us through the hardest times of our lives, Victoria gently but firmly explained that they needed to keep the guest list intimate, which apparently meant 300 of their closest friends and business associates, but not the woman who had cleaned houses to put food on my table. My mother came to the wedding, of course, wearing a dress she had saved for months to buy, and I could see the way Victoria's friends looked at her, could feel their judgment like a physical presence in the room, and I hated myself for being ashamed, for caring what they thought, for not having the courage to tell them all to go to hell. But I smiled through it all, played my part perfectly, the grateful girl who couldn't believe her luck, marrying into a family like this. And Marcus, sweet, weak Marcus, told me I looked beautiful and said his vows with tears in his eyes, and I believed that love would be enough, that we could build a life together separate from his family's influence. How wrong I was. The job offer came 6 months after the wedding, presented as a generous gift, an opportunity to prove myself and contribute to the family legacy. Gerald took me into his study, poured me an expensive scotch that burned my throat, and told me that they wanted to give me a chance to show what I was capable of. The downtown branch was struggling, he explained. It needed fresh ideas, new energy, someone who wasn't afraid to work hard and take risks. And if I could turn it around, well, that would prove to everyone that I was a real Ashford, that I deserved my place in the family. I was so honored, so grateful, so eager to prove myself that I didn't see it for what it was, a setup. They were giving me a failing property that they fully expected me to fail with, so they could point to it later as evidence that I wasn't cut out for the family business, that I was just a girl from nowhere who got lucky enough to marry well, but didn't have what it took to actually contribute anything meaningful. But I didn't fail. I succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations, including my own, and that's when the real problem started. Because as long as I was struggling, as long as I was working myself to death just to keep the branch afloat, they could patronize me, could offer advice and help that made them feel superior. But when I started actually making money, when my branch started outperforming properties that David and other family members were managing, suddenly I became a threat instead of a pet project. The criticism started small, comments about how I was working too much, how I was becoming obsessed, how I needed to find balance. But what they really meant was that I needed to slow down, to stop showing them up, to remember my place. When I implemented a new booking system that increased efficiency across all their properties, Gerald took credit for it in board meetings. When I negotiated a partnership with a luxury travel company that brought in high-end clients, David claimed he had been working on the same deal and I had just finalized his work. When a major travel magazine featured our branch in their top hidden gems issue, the article somehow failed to mention me by name, just referring to the Ashford family's innovative approach to boutique hospitality. I watched my accomplishments be erased or attributed to others over and over again, and every time I wanted to speak up, Marcus would tell me to let it go, to not make waves. That we all succeed as a family and individual recognition didn't matter. But it did matter. It mattered to me, because I had worked for every single one of those achievements, had earned them with sleepless nights and countless sacrifices, and watching other people take credit was like watching pieces of myself disappear. The breaking point started months before that dinner, though I didn't recognize it at the time. It was at David's birthday party, another lavish Ashford event where no expense was spared and everyone who was anyone was invited. I had just closed a major deal that would bring in revenue for years to come, and I was exhausted but happy, feeling like maybe this time they would acknowledge what I had done. Maybe this time I would get the recognition I had earned. I remember walking into the party with Marcus, wearing a dress I had splurged on because I wanted to look successful, wanted to look like I belonged. The party was in full swing, champagne flowing, laughter echoing through the grand ballroom they had rented, everyone having a wonderful time. I made my way through the crowd, accepting congratulations from people who knew about the deal, feeling for once like maybe I had finally arrived, finally proved myself beyond any doubt. That's when I overheard Victoria talking to a group of her society friends, not realizing I was within earshot, or maybe not caring. She was complaining, in that way wealthy women do when they think they're being discreet, but are actually quite loud, about how exhausting it was to have a daughter-in-law who was so desperate to prove herself, who couldn't just accept her role and be grateful for the opportunities she had been given. She said that I was making David look bad, making the family look bad, that my little successes were causing problems within the family hierarchy, that someone needed to remind me that I had married into the business, not built it. Her friends made sympathetic noises, agreeing that women like me, meaning women who came from working-class backgrounds, never really understood the difference between contributing to a family legacy and trying to take it over. I felt like I had been slapped, standing there in my expensive dress, holding a glass of champagne, having just secured a deal that would make them millions, and I was still just the girl from nowhere who needed to be put in her place. I wanted to confront her, wanted to walk over there and tell her exactly what I thought of her, and her snobbery, and her complete inability to see me as anything other than an interloper. But I didn't, because that's not what I did then, that's not who I was yet. Instead, I turned around and found Marcus, told him I wasn't feeling well, and asked if we could leave early. He barely looked up from his conversation with some business associates, told me to take an Uber home, that he needed to stay and network. That was the moment. Though I didn't fully realize it then, when something fundamental shifted inside me, when I started to understand that I was completely alone in this family, in this marriage, that no matter what I achieved or how hard I worked, I would never be one of them. And more importantly, I would never have the support of the man who was supposed to be my partner. The next few months were a blur of overwork and growing resentment. I threw myself into the business even harder, working longer hours, taking on more projects, because if they were going to accuse me of being too ambitious anyway, I might as well earn the criticism. But I also started doing something I had never done before. I started protecting myself, started documenting everything, started building a case for my own ownership of the branch that had become my entire world. I found a lawyer through a friend, a woman who had been through a similar situation with her ex-husband's family, and when I told her my story, she got this fierce look in her eyes and told me that she would help me, that what they were doing to me was wrong, and that I deserved better. We spent months going through documents, building a legal strategy, finding the loopholes and ambiguities in the structure they had set up for the branch, the ways in which their own arrogance and carelessness had left them vulnerable. Every email where they had referred to it as my project, every meeting where they had told me I was solely responsible for its success or failure, every document where they had separated the branch's finances from the parent company for tax purposes, it all added up to a case for independent ownership that was stronger than I had dared hope. And as we built this case, as I saw the possibility of freedom taking shape, I started to change in ways that surprised me. I stopped caring so much about what Victoria thought of me, stopped trying to win her approval or prove my worth to her. I stopped making excuses for Marcus's weakness, stopped telling myself that he loved me but was just caught in a difficult position. I started seeing my marriage clearly for what it had become, a business arrangement where I provided labor and legitimacy while receiving nothing in return but tolerance and occasional affection. I started remembering who I had been before I met the Ashfords, the girl who had worked 3 part-time jobs while going to college full-time, who had graduated with honors despite having none of the advantages my classmates had, who had built a career in hospitality from the absolute bottom, starting as a front desk clerk and working my way up through sheer determination and skill. That girl wouldn't have tolerated being treated the way I had been treated. That girl would have walked away years ago rather than beg for scraps of respect from people who would never value her. And slowly, painfully, I started to become her again. Started to remember that my worth wasn't determined by the Ashford family's acceptance, that I had value independent of their approval, that I deserved better than what I had been accepting. My lawyer, Rebecca, became not just my legal counsel, but something like a friend. Maybe the first real friend I had made in years, because all my previous friendships had faded away as I devoted more and more of myself to winning over a family that would never accept me. She told me stories about her own journey, how she had escaped a toxic marriage and rebuilt her life, how she had learned that sometimes burning bridges isn't destruction, but liberation, how the hardest part wasn't leaving but forgiving herself for staying so long. And I started to see my situation through her eyes, started to understand that I wasn't being dramatic or ungrateful or difficult. I was being abused. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, psychologically, systematically made to feel less than, to doubt my own worth, to accept treatment that no one should accept. The plan came together slowly, carefully, because we needed everything to be perfect, needed every legal protection in place, every document filed, every argument anticipated and countered. Rebecca explained that we were operating in a gray area, that the case for my ownership wasn't ironclad, but that it was strong enough that fighting it would cost the Ashfords more in legal fees and potential damages than they could ever recover, especially if I closed the branch and eliminated its value entirely. It was mutually assured destruction, but sometimes, she said, that's the only way to negotiate from a position of strength when you're dealing with people who have more money and power than you do. We set a timeline, agreed that I would wait for them to make the first move, because we both knew it was coming, knew that David's incompetence in his own role was becoming too obvious to ignore, and that they would need to do something to prop him up. And what better way than to give him the branch that I had made successful, to let him coast on my work while taking all the credit. And sure enough, that's exactly what they did. Called that family dinner, staged that humiliation, never imagining that I would have the audacity to fight back, to stand up for myself, to refuse to accept their decision gracefully. Have you ever spent years being one version of yourself, suppressing parts of who you are to fit into a mold someone else created for you, and then suddenly, violently, remembered who you really are underneath all that performance? That's what was happening to me in those months of preparation. I was excavating myself, digging through years of people-pleasing and accommodation, to find the core of who I was, who I had always been but had forgotten. And what I found surprised me. I found anger. Yes, a lot of anger that I had been suppressing for years, but I also found strength, resilience, a stubborn refusal to be diminished that had always been there, but that I had been trained to hide, to minimize, to apologize for. I found the part of me that came from my mother, who had worked those 3 jobs without complaint, who had raised me alone without bitterness, who had taught me by example that dignity isn't something that can be given or taken away by others, but something you claim for yourself. The night before that dinner, I barely slept. Lying awake next to Marcus in our expensive bed in our expensive house, feeling like a stranger in my own life, I thought about calling it off, about just accepting the demotion, about trying to make peace with the situation. Because even after everything, even knowing what I knew, part of me was still that girl who just wanted to belong, who wanted to be accepted, who wanted the fairy tale to have a happy ending. But then I thought about the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, thought about slowly disappearing, about watching David run my branch into the ground while I was expected to smile and support him, about having children with Marcus and raising them in a family that would teach them that some people matter and others don't, that success means knowing your place and staying in it, that love is conditional on compliance. And I realized that I couldn't do it, couldn't live that life, couldn't become the person they wanted me to be, because doing so would mean killing the person I actually was. And that price was too high, even for the security and status that came with being an Ashford. So when I walked into that restaurant the next evening, I was already decided, already committed, already free in my heart, even though the actual liberation was still to come. And when Victoria delivered her final humiliation, when she made it crystal clear that I would never be anything but tolerated at best and despised at worst, she actually did me a favor, because she made the choice easy, made it obvious, made it impossible for me to doubt or second-guess or talk myself out of what I needed to do. The week after that dinner was chaos in ways I had both anticipated and hadn't. The phone calls started immediately, dozens of them, from Gerald trying to be conciliatory, from Victoria alternating between threats and guilt trips, from David panicking about the closure of the branch, from Marcus begging me to reconsider, to think about our marriage, to not throw away everything we had built together. That last one almost made me laugh, because what exactly had we built together? A relationship where I did all the emotional labor and received none of the support? A partnership where I was expected to serve his family's interests while he stood by silently as they diminished and insulted me? I had built something, yes, but I had built it alone, and I was taking it with me when I left. I moved quickly because I knew that hesitation would be dangerous, that if I gave myself too much time to think, I might talk myself out of it, might let guilt or fear or hope pull me back into a situation that was slowly killing my spirit. Within 48 hours of that dinner, I had moved out of the house Marcus and I shared, taking only what was mine, only what I had brought into the marriage or bought with my own money. I found a small apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, truly mine, not decorated according to someone else's taste or standards, not chosen to impress anyone or maintain an image. That first night in my new apartment, sleeping on an air mattress because my furniture hadn't arrived yet, eating takeout Chinese food straight from the container, I felt more at home than I had felt in years in that showcase house with its designer furniture and empty rooms. The legal process was exactly as Rebecca had predicted, ugly and drawn out and expensive, but I had been prepared for that. The Ashfords hired a team of lawyers, the best money could buy, and they came at me with everything they had, accusing me of theft, fraud, breach of contract, everything they could think of. But Rebecca and her team were ready, and more importantly, the facts were on my side. Every document supported my case. Every email thread showed their own words treating the branch as my independent project. Every financial record demonstrated how I had invested my own money and taken on personal liability for debts when the branch was struggling. What the Ashfords hadn't counted on was my thoroughness, my documentation, my attention to detail, all the skills I had developed managing their business being turned against them. The depositions were particularly satisfying, watching Gerald and Victoria try to explain why they had given me complete autonomy if they didn't actually intend for me to have ownership. Watching David admit under oath that he had no idea how to run a hotel and had been relying on managers to do all the actual work while he took credit. But the most painful part was Marcus's deposition, where he had to answer questions about our marriage, about the way his family had treated me, about his failure to defend or support me. I wasn't present for it. Rebecca advised against that. But she told me later that he had broken down, had admitted that he knew his family had been wrong, that he should have stood up for me, that he regretted not being the husband I deserved. But regret isn't the same as action, and his tears in a lawyer's office didn't change the years of silence, the years of choosing his family's approval over his wife's dignity. The settlement, when it finally came, was better than I had hoped for, but also more emotionally devastating than I had expected. The Ashfords agreed to let me close the branch without interference, agreed to a divorce from Marcus with a fair division of assets we had accumulated during the marriage, and agreed to release me from any non-compete clauses that might have prevented me from working in hospitality in the future. In exchange, I agreed not to speak publicly about what had happened, not to damage their reputation or business prospects, not to pursue additional damages for emotional distress or discrimination. It felt like a gag order, like they were buying my silence, and in a way they were, but Rebecca explained that this was the price of freedom, that sometimes you have to compromise to get what you really want, which was to be completely free of them, legally and financially. The day the papers were signed, the day it was all officially over, I sat in Rebecca's office and felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief, yes, absolutely relief, but also grief, because even though the marriage had been dying for years, even though I knew leaving was right, there was still a part of me that mourned the loss of what I had hoped we would be, the life I had imagined we would build. I grieved for the girl I had been when I first met Marcus, so full of hope and love and naive faith that we could overcome our differences. I grieved for the years I had lost trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to earn approval from people who were never going to give it. But mostly, I felt free, lighter, like I could finally breathe fully for the first time in years. Closing the branch was harder than I expected emotionally, even though I had known it was coming, had planned for it, had made sure every employee would be taken care of. I met with each staff member individually, explained that the property was closing, but that they would receive generous severance packages, and that I would personally provide references and help them find new positions. Many of them cried, not just because they were losing their jobs, but because they said they were losing the best boss they had ever had, because the culture I had created at that branch had made them feel valued and respected in ways they had never experienced before. And that made me realize something important, that even though I was closing this chapter of my life, even though I was walking away from what I had built, I hadn't failed. I had created something meaningful, had made a difference in people's lives, had proved to myself and anyone paying attention that I was talented and capable and worthy of respect. The Ashfords might never acknowledge that, might spend the rest of their lives telling themselves and anyone who would listen that I was vindictive or crazy or ungrateful. But I knew the truth, and more importantly, the people whose opinions actually mattered knew the truth. The months after everything was finalized were strange, disorienting, like learning to walk again after an injury. I had to figure out who I was without the role I had been playing, without the constant pressure to prove myself, without the daily humiliation of trying to earn respect from people who would never give it. I spent a lot of time alone, not hiding exactly, but recuperating, healing from wounds that went deeper than I had realized. I reconnected with my mother, who I had been seeing less and less of during my marriage, because Victoria had made it clear that my background was an embarrassment, and I apologized for letting her be pushed to the margins of my life. She hugged me and told me she had been waiting for me to wake up, to remember who I was and where I came from, and that she was proud of me for finally putting myself first. I reconnected with old friends who I had lost touch with, people who knew me before I became Mrs. Marcus Ashford, and they welcomed me back into their lives without judgment, just genuine happiness that I had escaped a situation they could see was destroying me even if I couldn't. And slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild, not trying to recreate what I had before, but trying to create something new, something that was actually mine and not someone else's vision of what my life should be. I started consulting for small boutique hotels, helping them develop the kind of culture and service standards that had made my branch so successful, and I discovered that I loved it, loved working with people who appreciated my expertise, who listened to my ideas, who treated me as an equal rather than an interloper or a threat. I started writing about my experiences, not naming names because of the settlement agreement, but writing about the challenges women face when they marry into wealthy families, the ways in which class differences can poison relationships, the importance of maintaining your sense of self, even when everyone around you is trying to reshape you into someone else. And people responded. Hundreds of messages from women who had gone through similar experiences, who felt seen and validated by my words, who told me that my story had given them the courage to make changes in their own lives. That's when I realized that what had happened to me, as painful as it was, as much as I wished it had been different, had also been transformative in ways I never could have imagined. I had lost a marriage, a family, a position, a branch that I had poured my heart into, but I had gained something more valuable. I had gained myself back, had remembered that my worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval, had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from something that everyone else thinks you should be grateful for. Now, almost a year later, I can look back on that night in the restaurant with a kind of bittersweet gratitude because, even though it was one of the worst moments of my life, it was also the moment that set me free. I think about the person I was when I walked into that restaurant, still trying to please them, still hoping that maybe this time would be different, still believing that if I just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, diminished myself enough, I might finally be accepted. And I think about the person who walked out, who had finally had enough, who chose herself over their approval, who decided that dignity and self-respect were more important than security and status. Those two people, the one who walked in and the one who walked out, they're so different that sometimes it's hard to believe they're both me, but they are. And the journey from one to the other, as painful as it was necessary, was worth it, was the beginning of my real life. I won't lie and say everything has been easy since then, because it hasn't. There are days when I wonder if I made the right choice. Days when I see Marcus's social media posts and feel a pang of something like regret. Days when I worry about money or my future, or whether I'll ever trust someone enough to open my heart again. But even on those days, even when doubt creeps in, I know deep in my bones that I did the right thing, that staying would have meant dying a slow death of the spirit, that sometimes you have to burn everything down to rebuild something authentic and true. The Ashford branch, the one I poured 7 years of my life into, is gone now, closed permanently, the building leased to someone else, all traces of what I built erased. And sometimes that hurts, knowing that all that work, all those late nights, all those sacrifices, they didn't result in a lasting legacy in the way I once hoped. But then I remember the people whose lives I touched, the employees who tell me I changed their understanding of what work could be, the clients who say they've never experienced hospitality like what we provided, the small hotel owners who are implementing the systems and culture I developed, and I realize that the legacy isn't the building, it's the impact, and that can never be taken away or closed down or erased. I've learned so much about myself in this past year, about my strength, my resilience, my capacity to survive and even thrive after devastation. I've learned that I'm braver than I thought I was, that I can stand up for myself even when it costs me everything, that I can rebuild from nothing because I've done it before, and I can do it again. I've learned that the people who love you don't make you choose between your dignity and their approval, that real love supports and celebrates you rather than diminishing you, that family isn't always the people you're related to by blood or marriage, but the people who show up for you when things fall apart. And I've learned that sometimes the things that break us are also the things that remake us, that trauma can be transformative if we're willing to do the hard work of healing and growing, that hitting rock bottom gives you a solid foundation to build on in a way that surface-level success never does. I think about Victoria sometimes, wonder if she ever reflects on that night, if she ever questions whether the way they treated me was right or fair or decent. I doubt it because people like her rarely engage in that kind of self-examination, rarely admit that they might have been wrong or cruel or unjust. She probably tells herself that I was always going to be a problem, that I was too ambitious or too sensitive or too ungrateful, that they gave me opportunities I didn't deserve and I threw it back in their faces. And maybe that's okay. Maybe I don't need her to understand or acknowledge what she did. Maybe it's enough that I understand it, that I've processed it, that I've refused to let her version of events become my truth. I think about Marcus more often than I'd like to admit. Wonder if he's happy with the choice he made, if he regrets not fighting for us, if he ever really loved me, or if I was just a rebellion against his family that he didn't have the courage to fully commit to. We haven't spoken since the divorce was finalized. There's nothing left to say, really, but I heard through mutual acquaintances that he's dating someone new, someone from their social circle, someone his mother approves of, and I felt a strange mix of emotions when I heard that. Relief that he's moving on, vindication that he so quickly found someone more suitable in his family's eyes, and a tiny bit of sadness for what we could have been if he had been braver, if he had chosen me over them, even once. But that sadness is just a shadow now, an echo of feelings that have mostly faded, and I wish him well. I really do. Because holding on to anger or bitterness only hurts the person holding it, and I've been hurt enough. The truth is, this whole experience has taught me what I want and don't want from life going forward. I don't want to be with someone who can't stand up for me, who prioritizes other people's opinions over my well-being, who watches silently as I'm diminished and disrespected. I don't want to be part of a family or a culture where my worth is constantly questioned, where I have to prove myself over and over again, but never quite enough to be fully accepted. I don't want to sacrifice my identity or my values or my self-respect for the illusion of belonging, for the security of being part of something that ultimately makes me feel more alone than if I were actually by myself. What I do want is authenticity. Relationships where I can be fully myself without fear of judgment or rejection. Work that values my contributions and respects my expertise. A life that's mine and not a performance for someone else's benefit. And I'm building that life now, slowly, intentionally, carefully, making choices that honor who I am rather than who someone else thinks I should be. It's scary sometimes, being this honest, this unguarded, this committed to living authentically, because it means I might fail, might face rejection, might end up alone. But I've learned that being alone is not the worst thing that can happen. Being with people who make you feel alone is worse. And I'd rather be actually alone but true to myself than surrounded by people who only accept an edited, diminished version of me. So here I am, telling you this story, sharing this truth that I've been carrying for so long, because I think there are others out there like me, people who are in situations where they're being diminished, where they're told they should be grateful for treatment that's actually unacceptable, where they're sacrificing themselves trying to earn approval from people who will never truly value them. And I want you to know that you deserve better, that your worth isn't determined by other people's acceptance, that sometimes walking away from something that looks good on paper is the bravest and healthiest choice you can make. I want you to know that it's okay to put yourself first, to prioritize your dignity and self-respect over other people's comfort or expectations, to say no to situations that are slowly killing your spirit, even if everyone else thinks you're crazy for turning down such a good opportunity. And I want you to know that you can survive, that you can rebuild, that losing everything can actually be the beginning of finding yourself, as scary and painful as that process might be. This story, my story, it's not a tragedy even though it involves loss and pain and betrayal. It's actually a story of liberation, of finding the courage to choose yourself, of discovering that you're stronger than you ever imagined you could be. Yes, I lost my marriage, lost the business I had built, lost the family I had been trying so hard to be part of, but I gained something infinitely more valuable. I gained my freedom, my integrity, my sense of self, and the knowledge that I can survive anything because I've already survived the worst and came out stronger. I've learned that the people who truly matter will support you even when they don't fully understand your choices, will trust that you know what's best for yourself even when your decisions seem extreme to them, will celebrate your courage rather than questioning your judgment. My mother never once told me I was making a mistake leaving Marcus and his family, even though I know part of her worried about me giving up financial security. She just said that she trusted me, that she believed in me, that she would support whatever choice I made, and that unconditional support meant everything, gave me the foundation I needed to take the scariest leap of my life. And the friends who have remained, who have stood by me through this whole process, who have listened to me cry and rage and doubt and slowly heal, they've shown me what real loyalty looks like, what genuine care feels like, and I'm more grateful for them than I can possibly express. I know some of you watching this might think I'm bitter, might think I'm just another angry woman who couldn't handle a challenging family situation, who blew up her life over what you might see as minor slights or the normal difficulties of in-law relationships. And that's okay, you're entitled to your opinion, and I understand that from the outside, especially if you've never experienced this kind of systematic diminishment, it might seem like I overreacted. But I would encourage you to really think about what you would do in a similar situation, about how long you would tolerate being made to feel less than, about whether you would accept years of your accomplishments being erased, your contributions being minimized, your very presence being treated as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be valued. Think about whether you would stay in a marriage where your partner consistently chose other people's comfort over your dignity, where you were expected to smile through humiliation, where your value was only recognized when you were useful, but never when you needed support. And then ask yourself, what would it take for you to finally say enough is enough, to finally choose yourself over other people's approval, to finally walk away from something that was destroying you from the inside out? For me, it took 7 years and one final humiliation that was so blatant, so cruel, so utterly dismissive of everything I had given and everything I was, that I finally couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't tell myself that things would get better. Couldn't sacrifice one more piece of myself on the altar of belonging. And I don't regret it, not for a second. Because even though this past year has been hard, it's been my life, lived on my terms, and that freedom is worth more than all the security and status in the world. I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do next, about how I want to use this experience, and I've decided that I want to help other people who are in similar situations, whether that's through continuing to write about my experiences or through consulting work that specifically focuses on supporting women in male-dominated industries, or through advocacy for better protections for people who marry into businesses and then get pushed out. I don't have all the answers yet, and I'm still figuring out exactly what form this will take, but I know that I want my pain to have purpose, want my struggle to make things even slightly easier for the next woman who finds herself in a situation like mine. Because that's the thing about surviving trauma, about coming through the fire and making it to the other side. You have a responsibility to reach back and help others who are still in the flames, to share what you learned, to be the voice of hope and possibility that you might have needed when you were in the darkest place. So that's what I'm doing now. That's why I'm sharing this story. That's why I'm being so vulnerable and open about things that are deeply personal and sometimes embarrassing to admit. I'm sharing because I know there's someone out there who needs to hear it, who needs to know they're not alone, who needs permission to put themselves first and walk away from a situation that's slowly destroying them. And if you're that person, if this story resonates with you, if you see pieces of your own experience reflected in mine, I want you to know that I see you, I believe you, and I'm telling you that you deserve better. You are worthy of respect and dignity and love that doesn't come with conditions or compromises that diminish who you are. Let me tell you what happened after I announced I was closing the branch, because the reaction was something I need you to understand fully. The panic that set in for the Ashford family was immediate and profound, because they suddenly realized that they had vastly underestimated me, had assumed I would just accept their decision meekly, had never imagined I would have the audacity or the resources to fight back in such a devastating way. Gerald called me personally the next morning, his voice tight with barely controlled anger trying to disguise itself as reasonable concern, asking me to reconsider, saying we could work something out, that there was no need for such drastic action. But I could hear the fear underneath the bluster, could sense that he was finally understanding that they had pushed too far, had underestimated the wrong person, and were now facing consequences they had never anticipated. Victoria tried a different approach, calling me in tears, claiming she had never meant to hurt me, that I had misunderstood her intentions, that she thought of me as a daughter and was devastated that I would think otherwise. It was such obvious manipulation, such a transparent attempt to gaslight me into doubting my own perceptions and experiences, that I almost laughed. This woman who had spent 7 years making me feel inferior, who had just publicly humiliated me in front of the entire family, was now claiming she loved me like a daughter. But I didn't argue with her, didn't try to make her acknowledge the truth, because I realized that her acknowledgement didn't matter, that I didn't need her to admit what she had done to know that it was wrong, that my truth was valid regardless of whether she accepted it. David was perhaps the most pathetic in his response, calling me multiple times, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails about how this was affecting his reputation, how people in the industry were talking, how he needed that branch to prove himself and I was sabotaging his career. The complete lack of self-awareness was stunning. His inability to see that his reputation problems had nothing to do with me and everything to do with his own incompetence, his own failure to develop any actual skills or work ethic, his own choice to coast on his family name rather than earning respect through actual achievement. I felt a moment of pity for him, actually, because he was in his mid-30s and still so dependent on his parents, still so entitled and helpless, still believing that success should be handed to him rather than earned. But that pity didn't change my decision, because his problems weren't mine to solve, and I was done sacrificing my own well-being to prop up people who had never shown me any genuine care or respect. Marcus was the one whose reaction affected me the most, even though I tried not to let it. He showed up at my new apartment 3 days after the dinner, looking haggard and desperate, begging me to reconsider not just the branch but the divorce, saying he loved me, that he knew he had failed me but he wanted to make it right, that he would stand up to his family from now on, that we could start over. And for just a moment, just a brief flicker of time, I wanted to believe him, wanted to think that maybe we could salvage something from the wreckage of our marriage. But then I asked him one question, just one. If I agreed to stay married to him but kept my decision about closing the branch, would he support me? And he hesitated, just for a second. But that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. He wanted me back, yes, but only if I would compromise, only if I would back down, only if I would once again prioritize his family's interests over my own dignity. And I realized that he hadn't changed at all, that his tears and promises were just another form of manipulation, that he was still the same weak man who had sat silently while his mother eviscerated me. And I deserved better than that, deserved someone who would support me without hesitation or conditions. So I told him to leave, told him that we were done, that the divorce was happening, and nothing he could say would change my mind. And I watched him walk away knowing that I was making the right choice even though it hurt to do it. The business fallout was significant and satisfying in equal measure. The closure of the branch made industry news, because it had been so successful, and its sudden closure was unprecedented, and people started asking questions about what had happened, why someone would close such a profitable property. The Ashfords tried to control the narrative, putting out statements about restructuring and strategic decisions. But people in the industry aren't stupid. They talk. They know things. And pretty soon word got out that there had been a family dispute, that the manager who had made the branch successful had been forced out and had taken her business with her. My phone started ringing with job offers, with people who had been impressed by my work and wanted to hire me, with competitors who were eager to benefit from the Ashfords' loss. And for the first time in years, I felt valued, felt like my expertise and experience were recognized and desired, felt like I was seen as a talented professional rather than just someone's daughter-in-law playing at business. I didn't take most of those offers because I realized that I didn't want to work for someone else's vision anymore, didn't want to build someone else's dream, wanted to create something that was entirely mine. So I started my own consulting firm, Small at first, just me and a few freelance contractors, specializing in helping independent boutique hotels improve their operations and culture. And it's been growing steadily, word of mouth spreading about the quality of my work, about the results I deliver, about how I understand both the numbers side of the business and the human side, how I can help properties become more profitable while also creating better environments for their employees. It's not as financially lucrative as running the Ashford branch was, at least not yet, but it's mine, completely and totally mine, and that makes it infinitely more valuable than any salary or title I could have gotten working for them. I've also started speaking at industry conferences about workplace culture and family business dynamics, sharing lessons from my experience without naming names, helping other people navigate the complex intersections of family, business, and personal identity. And the response has been incredible. People coming up to me after presentations with tears in their eyes, thanking me for giving voice to experiences they thought were unique to them, telling me that my story has helped them understand their own situations better, has given them permission to set boundaries or make changes or demand better treatment. That's when I realized that what the Ashfords meant as my greatest humiliation, that dinner where they tried to put me in my place once and for all, had actually become the catalyst for something meaningful, for a career and a life that's more authentic and fulfilling than anything I could have achieved staying in their system, playing by their rules, accepting their definition of success. Have you ever noticed how the people who hurt you the most often don't even realize they're doing it? Or worse, they realize it but don't care, because your pain is less important to them than maintaining their comfort or protecting their ego? That's what I kept coming back to as I processed everything that had happened, the realization that to the Ashfords, I was never a person with feelings and dreams and dignity. I was a role, a function, a problem to be managed, or a resource to be exploited. And once I truly understood that, once I accepted that they would never see me any differently, no matter what I did or how hard I tried, it became so much easier to let go, to stop hoping for something that was never going to come, to stop blaming myself for not being enough when the truth was that they were never going to consider anyone from outside their social class as truly enough. I started therapy during this time because I realized I needed help processing 7 years of emotional abuse and manipulation, needed support in rebuilding my self-esteem and learning to trust my own perceptions again, needed to understand why I had stayed so long in a situation that was so clearly toxic. And my therapist helped me see patterns I hadn't recognized, ways in which I had been gradually isolated from my support system, ways in which my sense of reality had been systematically undermined, ways in which I had been conditioned to doubt my own worth and defer to their judgment about everything. She explained something called betrayal trauma, the specific kind of psychological damage that happens when someone you love and trust treats you in ways that violate that trust. And it was like a light bulb went on, helping me understand why this had been so painful, why I couldn't just get over it the way some people suggested I should. The work of healing has been ongoing, harder than I expected, but also more rewarding, because I'm not just recovering from what happened with the Ashfords. I'm also excavating and healing much older wounds, messages I internalized growing up about my worth being tied to my usefulness, about my value being determined by how much I could do for others, about my needs being less important than everyone else's comfort. And as I've healed those deeper wounds, I've become more clear about what I want and need, more confident in setting boundaries, more willing to walk away from situations that don't serve me, more selective about who I let into my inner circle. I've learned that it's okay to be difficult, that standing up for yourself doesn't make you unreasonable or demanding or hard to get along with. It makes you someone with self-respect who expects to be treated with basic dignity. I've learned that not everyone will like you or approve of your choices, and that's not just okay, but actually necessary, because trying to please everyone means you end up pleasing no one, least of all yourself. And I've learned that the people who really love you will support you, even when they don't understand your choices, will trust that you know what's best for yourself, will celebrate your strength rather than criticizing your decisions. As I'm recording this, sharing this story with all of you, I'm aware that the Ashfords might see it, might recognize themselves even though I've been careful not to name names, might be angry or hurt, or feel that I've violated the terms of our settlement by speaking about this publicly. And honestly, I hope they do see it, hope they hear this story, and maybe, just maybe, have a moment of self-reflection about how they treated me, about whether the way they handled things was right or fair or decent. But I'm not holding my breath because people like that rarely change, rarely admit wrongdoing, rarely take responsibility for the harm they cause. They'll probably just tell themselves that I'm bitter and vindictive, that I'm trying to damage their reputation because I couldn't handle the business world, that I'm proof that people from lower class backgrounds don't have the grace or character to handle success with dignity. And you know what? That's okay. They can think whatever they want. They can tell themselves whatever story helps them sleep at night, because I know the truth. And more importantly, I've made peace with it. The truth is complex and nuanced. The truth is that they probably didn't wake up every day thinking about how to hurt me. They probably genuinely believed they were being reasonable, that they had every right to make the decisions they made about the business, that I was being dramatic or oversensitive when I took offense at their treatment. But impact matters more than intent, and the impact of their actions was devastating regardless of what they intended, and I'm allowed to honor my own experience, to name what happened to me as wrong, to refuse to minimize or excuse behavior that was harmful just because the people doing it didn't think they were being cruel. That's something I've really had to work on in therapy, giving myself permission to trust my own perceptions, to believe my own experiences, to not constantly second-guess whether I'm overreacting or being too sensitive or making mountains out of molehills. Because that self-doubt, that constant questioning of my own reality, was one of the most insidious effects of being in that family. Being made to feel like my feelings were invalid, like my perceptions were wrong, like I was the problem rather than the way I was being treated. And breaking free from that, learning to trust myself again, has been one of the most important parts of my healing journey. Now let me address something that I know some of you might be thinking. Was it worth it? Was burning it all down, closing a successful business, ending my marriage, walking away from financial security, was all of that really worth it just to make a point, just to assert my dignity, just to refuse to accept treatment that other people might have just tolerated? And my answer is an unequivocal yes, it was absolutely worth it. Because what was the alternative? Stay in a marriage where I was invisible except when I was useful? Keep working for a family that would never truly value my contributions? Raise children in an environment where they would learn that some people matter and others don't? That success means knowing your place and staying in it? Slowly disappear, year by year, until I was just a ghost of the person I had once been, going through the motions of a life that looked good on paper but felt empty and suffocating? No. 1,000 times no. That would not have been worth it. That would have been a living death. And I would rather have uncertainty and struggle and the difficulty of starting over than the slow, steady erosion of my spirit that came with staying. Some losses are actually gains in disguise. And losing the Ashfords, losing that branch, losing that version of my life, it freed me to become who I was always meant to be, to live authentically, to build something real and mine and meaningful. And yes, there are days when I'm scared about money, days when I wonder if I'll ever find love again, days when I see someone from that life and feel a pang of something like regret. But those days are getting fewer and further between, and they're vastly outnumbered by days when I wake up feeling grateful for my freedom, excited about my work, proud of who I'm becoming, connected to people who genuinely care about me, and confident that I made the right choice even though it was the hardest one. So now I want to speak directly to anyone watching this who sees themselves in my story, who is in a situation where they're being diminished or disrespected or taken advantage of, but feels trapped because leaving would mean losing security or status, or the life they've built. First, I want you to know that you're not crazy, you're not overreacting, you're not too sensitive or too ambitious or too anything. If something feels wrong to you, if you're being treated in ways that make you feel small or invisible or worthless, that feeling is valid, trust it. Don't let anyone gaslight you into doubting your own perceptions. Don't let anyone convince you that you should be grateful for treatment that's actually unacceptable. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're the problem when the actual problem is the way you're being treated. Second, I want you to know that you have options, even when it feels like you don't. Even when everyone around you is telling you that you need to just accept things as they are. You can set boundaries, you can demand better treatment, you can walk away if necessary. And yes, there will be consequences, there will be people who are upset with you, there will be financial or social or emotional costs. But there are also costs to staying, costs to your mental health, your self-esteem, your sense of identity, your ability to show up authentically in your own life, and sometimes those costs are higher than the costs of leaving, even if they're less visible. Third, I want you to know that you're stronger than you think you are, that you can survive things that feel unsurvivable, that you can rebuild from nothing because you are not nothing. You're someone with skills and value and worth that exists independent of anyone else's recognition or approval. I know it's scary to imagine starting over, to imagine losing everything you've worked for, to imagine facing the unknown without the security you've been clinging to. But I promise you that there is life after leaving. that there is freedom and authenticity and possibility waiting for you on the other side of that fear, and that you deserve to experience it. And fourth, I want you to know that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom, and you don't have to do this alone. Find a therapist who specializes in trauma or emotional abuse. Find a lawyer who will help you understand your rights and options. Find friends or family members who will support you without judgment. Find online communities of people who have been through similar experiences and can offer perspective and encouragement. Build a support system before you make any major changes, because having people in your corner makes everything easier, makes the scary times more bearable, makes the process of rebuilding less isolating. I wish I had asked for help sooner. Wish I hadn't tried to handle everything alone for so long. Because the moment I finally reached out and started building a team of people who had my back, everything became more manageable, more hopeful, more possible. Now, if you're someone watching this who has never been in a situation like mine, who has always been accepted and valued and respected in your relationships and family systems, I want to ask you to please be gentle with people who are going through what I went through. Don't tell them they're overreacting. Don't suggest they should just try harder or be more grateful. Don't imply that leaving is the easy way out or that they're being dramatic. You don't know what it's like to be systematically diminished, to have your accomplishments erased, to be made to feel like you should be grateful for scraps when you deserve a full meal. And even if you mean well, even if you think you're being helpful by suggesting they just tolerate the situation or focus on the positive aspects, you're actually being harmful. You're reinforcing the messages they're already getting from the people who are mistreating them. You're making them doubt themselves even more. Instead, believe them, support them, validate their experiences, and if they decide to leave, celebrate their courage rather than questioning their judgment. The world needs more people who support those who are trying to escape toxic situations, who understand that sometimes walking away is the bravest and healthiest choice, who respect that everyone has the right to be treated with dignity, regardless of their circumstances or background. And if you're someone in a position of power or privilege, if you're part of a family business or a social circle where people from different backgrounds are sometimes treated as less than, I challenge you to examine your own behavior and attitudes. Are you contributing to systems and dynamics that make people feel inferior? Are you standing by silently while others are being disrespected? Are you benefiting from structures that exploit or diminish people who don't have the same advantages you do? And if the answer to any of those questions is yes, I challenge you to do better, to speak up, to use your privilege to create more equitable and respectful environments, to be the person who breaks the cycle rather than perpetuating it. Because change doesn't happen unless people who benefit from the status quo decide to make it happen, unless those with power choose to share it rather than hoard it, unless people of privilege use their advantages to lift others up rather than keep them down. Before I close this story, I want to share what I've learned about family, about real family versus biological or legal family, because that's been one of the most profound realizations of this whole experience. I used to think that family was the people you were related to, the people you were connected to by blood or marriage, and that those connections created obligations and loyalties that superseded everything else. But I've learned that real family, true family, is the people who show up for you, who support you unconditionally, who celebrate your successes without jealousy and comfort you in your failures without judgment, who see you fully and love you anyway, who make you feel safe and valued and respected just by being yourself. By that definition, the Ashfords were never my family. Despite the marriage, despite the years I spent trying to earn that title, despite all the family dinners and holidays and events where I played my role perfectly, they were people I was legally related to, but they never made me feel like I belonged, never treated me with the basic respect and kindness that should be the foundation of family relationships, never had my back when things got hard. And recognizing that, accepting that I was never going to have the family I had hoped for with them, was painful, but also liberating, because it freed me to find my real family, my chosen family, the people who love me not despite who I am, but because of who I am. My real family is my mother, who has always been my biggest supporter, who taught me by example what strength and dignity look like, who never gave up on me even when I was too busy trying to impress the Ashfords to give her the time and attention she deserved. My real family is my friend Sarah, who I've known since college, who never liked Marcus's family and tried gently to warn me about them, who was there for me every single day after I left, who let me cry on her couch and brought me food when I forgot to eat and reminded me of my worth when I was struggling to see it myself. My real family is my lawyer, Rebecca, who started as a professional relationship but became a genuine friend, who fought for me like I was her sister, who celebrated every victory and helped me navigate every setback, who showed me what it looks like when someone has your back without ulterior motives. My real family is the community of people I've connected with through my speaking and writing, people I've never met in person, but who have shared their stories with me, who have encouraged me and supported me, and made me feel less alone in this journey. These are the people who make me feel seen and valued and loved. These are the relationships that fill my cup instead of draining it. These are the connections that make life worth living. And I'm so grateful for every single one of them. And I'm open now to building new family, to finding a partner someday who will be my teammate rather than someone I have to perform for, to maybe having children who I can raise with the understanding that their worth is inherent and not something they need to earn, to creating a life that's full of authentic connections rather than transactional relationships. I'm not in a hurry because I'm learning to enjoy my own company, to be comfortable with solitude, to find fulfillment in my work and my friendships without needing a romantic relationship to feel complete. But I'm also hopeful about the future, about the possibility of love that's real and mutual and based on respect and genuine partnership, and I trust that when I'm ready, when I've fully healed and know exactly what I want and won't settle for less, that love will find me, because I'm finally at a place where I know my worth and won't accept anything less than I deserve. The other thing I've learned is about success, about what it really means and how we measure it. I used to think success was about money and status and impressive titles, about being part of prestigious families or businesses, about having the kind of life that looks good on paper and makes other people envious. But I've realized that real success is about alignment, about living in a way that's true to your values, about doing work that feels meaningful, about having relationships that are authentic and supportive, about being able to look at yourself in the mirror and respect the person looking back. By those measures, I'm more successful now, living in my small apartment and building my consulting business from scratch, than I ever was when I was managing the Ashford branch and playing the role of the perfect daughter-in-law. Because now I'm living my life, making my choices, building my dreams, and that authenticity, that freedom, that alignment between who I am and how I'm living, that's worth more than any amount of money or status or approval from people who never truly valued me anyway. I'm successful because I had the courage to leave a situation that was destroying me, because I chose dignity over security, because I refused to accept less than I deserved even when it meant losing everything I had built. And I'm successful because I'm using my experience to help others, to create something meaningful from my pain, to be a voice for people who are still struggling to find their own voices, to contribute to a world where hopefully fewer people have to go through what I went through. That's the kind of success that matters, the kind that can't be taken away by anyone else, the kind that comes from within rather than being bestowed from without. And I'm proud of it in ways I never was proud of my achievements with the Ashfords, because this success is truly mine. As I come to the end of this story, I want to say thank you to everyone who has listened, who has stayed with me through this long, emotional journey, who has opened their hearts to my experience and hopefully learned something from it. Telling this story has been cathartic for me, has helped me process and make sense of everything that happened, has given me a sense of closure that I didn't know I needed. But more importantly, I hope it's been meaningful for you. I hope it's given you something to think about, whether that's examining your own relationships, or being more compassionate toward people who are in difficult situations, or finding the courage to make changes in your own life that you've been putting off. I hope you understand now why I made the choices I made, why closing that branch and ending my marriage and walking away from everything felt like the only option, why preserving my dignity and self-respect was worth more to me than preserving a life that looked good but felt hollow. And I hope you'll take away from this story the understanding that you deserve to be treated with respect, that your worth is not determined by other people's acceptance or approval, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from something that everyone else thinks you should be grateful for. Life is too short to spend it trying to please people who will never truly value you, too precious to waste on relationships that make you feel small, too important to sacrifice on the altar of other people's expectations or judgments. You deserve to live authentically, to pursue your dreams, to surround yourself with people who love and support you, to build a life that feels true to who you are rather than who someone else thinks you should be. And if you're in a situation right now where you're struggling with whether to stay or go, whether to keep trying or walk away, whether to accept less than you deserve or demand better, I want you to ask yourself this question. When you're old and looking back on your life, what choice will you be proud of? What decision will let you respect yourself? What path will let you say that you lived with integrity and courage and authenticity? And then I want you to have the bravery to make that choice, even if it's scary, even if it's hard, even if everyone around you thinks you're crazy, because your life belongs to you. And you're the only one who has to live with the consequences of your choices. And you deserve to make choices that honor who you are and what you need, not choices that make other people comfortable or maintain a status quo that's slowly killing your spirit. Now, I need to ask something of you, because your engagement really matters not just to me, but to everyone who might benefit from hearing this story. If this story resonated with you, if it touched your heart or made you think or helped you understand something about your own life or someone else's, please leave a comment below telling me what you connected with, what questions you have, what your own experiences have been. Have you been in a situation where you had to choose between security and dignity? Have you watched someone you love struggle with a toxic family or relationship? What lessons have you learned about standing up for yourself? I read every comment, and your stories and perspectives mean the world to me. They help me understand that I'm not alone, that this experience I went through matters, that sharing it can make a difference. And please, if you found value in this story, if you think it's important for others to hear, hit that like button, because it helps this video reach more people who might need to hear this message. Understanding content like this, stories that deal with real issues like family dynamics and toxic relationships and finding the courage to choose yourself, it's so important because these are things many people struggle with, but few people talk about openly. By engaging with this content, by liking and commenting and sharing, you're helping create a space where these conversations can happen, where people can feel less alone in their struggles, where the silence around these issues can be broken. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to My Truth Revealed Tales, because I'm committed to continuing to share stories like this, stories that are real and raw and honest, stories that tackle difficult subjects with nuance and compassion, stories that hopefully help you understand yourself and others better. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story, because each one is crafted with care to provide you with content that's meaningful, that makes you think, that maybe even changes your perspective or gives you courage to make changes in your own life. This channel is about truth, about authenticity, about sharing real experiences that matter, and I'd be honored to have you as part of this community. Remember, your story matters too, your experiences are valid, your voice deserves to be heard, and there's a whole community here of people who understand, who support each other, who believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect regardless of their background or circumstances. So please, be part of this conversation, share your thoughts, connect with others who have been through similar experiences, and let's build something meaningful together. Thank you for listening to My Truth, for being part of my healing journey, for supporting this channel and the important conversations we're having here. Until next time, remember that you are worthy, you are valuable, you are deserving of love and respect and all good things, and you have the strength within you to create the life you deserve, even if that means walking away from a life that no longer serves you. Be brave, be kind to yourself, and never forget that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival, and sometimes it's the most important choice you'll ever make. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.